The end of the Great War and the signing of the Paris Peace Settlement changed interactions between Asian countries and imperial forces. People in Asia began to yearn for their own autonomy and unity within their own nations, and more people began to take political action. The three countries this chapter will focus on are India, China, and Japan. First, I'm going to focus on India. In India, people started to want freedom from British rule, but religious differences between the Hindus and the Muslims created great divides within the people. The path to Indian freedom started out with the Indian National Congress. The Congress, established in 1885, first looked to gain independence by collaborating with the British, but after World War I, they began to distance themselves from the British. While the Indian National Congress was comprised of Muslims and Hindus, the Muslim League was another organization for national freedom, but had the backing of the British government. While both organizations worked for freedom, the Muslim League took special care to make sure that any progress that would be made would be fair to Muslims as well, and was worried that British oppression would simply be replaced by oppression by the Hindu people. These organizations were mostly dormant during the Great War, as the Indian people sympathized with the British, but as food was rationed and life during the war became difficult, more and more discontent was blamed on the British. Scholars read Woodrow Wilson's 14 Points and Lenin's appeal for a united struggle by proletarians and colonized peoples, and many people rebelled. In order to combat these rebellions, the British used violent means to quell the complaints, which only helped to fuel the conflict. In the midst of this violence, Mohandas Gandhi led the movement to independence. He came from a well-off background, studied law in the United Kingdom, and worked in a British law firm in South Africa. While living in South Africa for 25 years, he fought against discrimination against Indian people while abiding to the moral philosophy of Ahisma, or tolerance and nonviolence, and developing a passive resistance technique which he coined as Satyagraha, which means truth and firmness. He practiced self-restraint in every aspect of his life and became a man of strong will. Upon his return to India in 1915, he championed reform that benefited all the people, as he was a strong opponent of the caste system. He did this by including the uneducated by speaking in colloquial terms and making sure commoners were represented in the Indian National Congress. He led two movements, the non-cooperation movement of 1920 to 1922 and the civil disobedience movement of 1930. This led to a lashback from the British government, particularly in the city of Amritsar in Punjab, where 379 people were killed by colonial troops. This violence eventually came to a halt when the British Parliament passed the India Act in 1935, which allowed India to rule itself with a two-house parliament, but was still under the British rule. This didn't work because many of the regional princes of India and the overwhelming divide between the Muslims and the Hindus remained. The Great Depression took a toll on India because the British did not assist India. It also made relations worse between the Muslims and the Hindus, as Hindus were the landowners to the Muslim tenant farmers who could not repay their debts. Muhammad Ali Jinnah, a lawyer and the head of the Muslim League, proposed that India should be split into two states, India and Pakistan. The next country I'll focus on is China. China was split between the nationalist and communist parties who both wanted power. For the first part of the 20th century, China was in political turmoil. A revolution in 1911 forced the Xuantong emperor to abdicate and was replaced by Sun Yat-sen. However, the government that emerged from the new republic was not strong. Beijing did not have the centralized power that they needed, and the warlords who ruled the smaller regions contributed to the decline of Chinese society by neglecting irrigation projects critical to farmers. They revived the opium trade, and they led to the decline of crucial economic investments. China also had previously made many treaties with foreign governments, which allowed foreign governments to interfere in Chinese affairs, and this restricted economic development. After World War I, young Chinese people became increasingly nationalistic. Young people and scholars were disappointed in reforms after the Great War because instead of giving Chinese people more freedom, they allowed foreign countries like Japan to interfere in Chinese matters. This led to the May 4th movement, where many people rose to oppose Japanese and foreign intrusion in Chinese politics. The disappointment in the lack of Western aid after the Great War led many Chinese people to gain interest in Lenin's vein of Marxist theories. This struck many people, and in 1921, the Chinese Communist Party formed in Shanghai. One of the first members was Mao Zedong, who believed that communism would solve issues of the lack of women's rights and the problems in divorce, arranged marriage, and foot binding. All the while, Sun Yat-sen still led the country as the prime minister. He explains his ideology in his 3 Principles of the People, which called for the elimination of special privileges for foreigners, national reunification, economic development, and a democratic republican government based on universal suffrage. He created the Nationalist People's Party, or Kuomintang, and the Chinese Communist Party quickly made up 1/3 of Kuomintang. Soviet advisors came to China to help both organizations become more effective and efficient systems. Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, and he was replaced by Chiang Kai-shek, who was trained in Japan and in the Soviet Union. Chiang Kai-shek did not support social revolution for all, and he started the military operation, the Northern Expedition, in which he turned against the communists and ended cooperation between the 2 parties. He declared Kuomintang as the official government of China, and the communists retreated to southeast China. China did not feel the effects of the Great Depression due to its large domestic markets. However, it did face 3 challenges in the 30s. First, warlords ruled many areas despite the Kuomintangs having control of the government. Second, the Communist Party still posed a major threat. And finally, the Japanese aggression was strong. Yet, Chiang Kai-shek focused on the communist threat, forcing the communists to take action. They embarked on the difficult Long March, a 10,000-kilometer journey, and established headquarters in northwestern China. This march was particularly difficult because of the Kuomintang's forces, hunger, and weather conditions. The efforts of the Communist Party struck a chord with the general people of China, and many people joined. Mao Zedong led the Long March and became the face of the Chinese Communist Party because of his efforts in the Long March. He created Maoism, a belief that the power of the peasants was stronger than urban proletarians based on his experiences as the head of the Chinese Communist Party. The final country I'm going to focus on is Japan. After the Great War, the status of Japan on the international playing field rose as Japan was named one of the Big 5 powers. Even though Japan had some imperialistic goals before World War I, many Western countries had forgotten about it. Japan promised in many treaties that they would limit naval development, leave the Shandong province of China, and guaranteed China's territorial integrity. In 1928, they signed the Kellogg-Briand Pact, which renounced war. During the Great War, Japan sold ammunition to the Allies and were able to pick up trading in the places which the European countries neglected due to the course of war. Japan's economy flourished, and it was a generally good time for Japan. Yet after the war, Japan faced recessions caused by rapid inflation and labor unrest. The Great Depression caused Japan's economy to face plummeting industrial production, huge job layoffs, declining trade, and financial chaos. All this failure led to much frustration in the Japanese people, and many people called for social reforms. Yet, even though the public called for mass political and social reforms, the conservatives in Japan did not sign any advances into law after the 1925 law for universal male suffrage. A myriad of corruption and bribery led the xenophobic nationalists to lose faith in the government, and they created a fixation on preserving Japanese culture and ousting any Western influences. Violence in the form of assassinations led to the murder of Prime Minister Inukai Tsuyoshi. Many Japanese politicians faced constituents that were for creating a militant, self-sufficient Japan that would take over much of East Asia. Militarists were able to capitalize on the political unrest caused during the Depression and gain much public support. Japan had land in Manchuria, in China, because it maintained the railroad and had troops positioned there. As China began to unify, Japan felt its position in Manchuria was threatened, and the turmoil of China's opposing parties made it a perfect target at that time. In order to cause more unrest, Japanese troops exploited a leg of the South Manchuria Railway north of Mukden and blamed it on the Chinese. By 1932, Japanese troops had gained control of all of Manchuria, establishing Japan's strong military roots in China. Chiang Kai-shek asked the League of Nations to intervene, and after they consulted on the issue, Japan was told to leave Manchuria. Japan, disagreeing with the sentence, left the League of Nations and set out to conquest more land in East Asia. By this point, the Japanese nationalists had already established Japan's national image to be a militant and imperialistic nation. So while all three countries built up their national identities during this time after World War I, there are significant differences in what was actually going on. In India, the main issue was the struggle for freedom from British colonization. However, this was also challenged by differences in religious ideas between the Hindus and Muslims. In China, they had something similar where they had differences in political ideas. However, the conflicts between the Communist Party and the National People's Party of China ended up becoming violent and caused great rifts within the nation. And in Japan did not have to fight for its own freedom or independence. However, Japan, after suffering economic losses in the 1930s, Japan started to rebuild itself as a stronger and imperialist nation, which eventually wreaked havoc on the entire world.